Hi guys, we are Josh and Debs Walker, and we've been serving with Teen Street for many years in lots of different capacities, speaking and writing the program, Bible studies, all those things, and have been around OM for all of that time, but then Josh actually was born into OM. So we are from Dublin in Ireland, and we live at the moment in Houston in Texas. And so we wanted to just spend some time with you guys. We know that you're all about to go on the mission field with your parents, and just kind of chatting through some things that have been important for us in our own walks with God, and also what we've seen over the years are really important for young people going on the mission field with their parents. And so, like I said, Josh was actually a missionary kid himself with OM.
Yeah, I was born in Beirut, Lebanon, and left there because the war. We were in Iran for a while, left there because of unrest as well. I spent 5 years on ships, on the OM ships, and I ended up in Ireland when I was just turning 11 years old, and it was a big shock. That was one of the biggest shifts that I've ever had to deal with, where you're coming from ships, community, and then all of a sudden you're in this Western world, and that was a very difficult transition for me. And I remember times, it doesn't even seem that long ago, but I remember trying to hide my tears in high school. I was so lonely and had no one. I remember feeling so out of place, and I realized, though, looking back, I had become very good. All the travel and the movement had made me very good at working out what other people wanted from me, what people expected from me. And I when I look back, I realized that how I felt about myself was all dependent on other people and how I fit in and how they responded to me. And I wanted people to respond to me. I wanted attention, but I didn't want too much attention. And it was paralyzing, actually. I was on the rugby team, and so I was able to try to fit in here and working on just having friends and being part of what was going on. But it got so bad, I think when I was 15 or 16, there was one year that it seemed like the whole school year, I was paralyzed by this fear of saying the wrong thing, that really I went a year almost saying nothing the entire year at school, just trying to fly under the radar. I was so consumed with fear that I was gonna mess up or get the wrong attention, or that people were gonna laugh at me or look at me wrong. And my life at that time really was consumed by just trying to fit into what was going on around me. It was some tough times.
So what would you say helped you then as a missionary kid? Because we don't want that to be your guys' experience.
Yeah.
We're not actually speaking that over you.
Yeah.
That's not the experience of everybody.
No.
But I know that Josh has, and I have learned myself about walking in my true identity in the Lord. And that's something that we want to share with you guys today, just what it means to know our identity in the Lord, what it means to walk in it, no matter what, like when you go to a new country, into a new school setting, or maybe even if you're homeschooled, you're going to be maybe on sports teams or in music or something, where it can be difficult. And so we know that when we know our true identity from the Lord, we hear what He thinks of us. It's actually just a game changer for being able to be with new people.
Yeah. So what was it for me? We're gonna unravel that a little bit. We want to talk about that because it's a journey. It was a journey. It wasn't like one day I woke up and I was set free from that. It was a realization and a walking to the point where I went from this kid that lived in fear that people at school would find out that my dad was that guy in the city center who was preaching with a sketchboard and painting and telling people about Jesus. I went from a fear of that to a pride that was my dad. But that was a journey, and it took a while, and we want to look at that today. And we're going to look at this guy called Moses. I'm sure you guys all know the story of Moses thrown into a river as a little baby in a little basket. We're going to look at him because he goes on a journey with God and finds out who he is, finds out who God is, and his purpose, and a freedom in that. So.
And for me, I didn't grow up in a missionary family. Actually, my parents weren't even Christians. And so it was a very different situation. So I wasn't kind of trying to fit in or something in that way. But my parents' focus in their lives was all about everything external, how successful my brother and I were, what teams we were on, what grades we got, all that kind of stuff. And so that kind of just, I had the lie in me that was my identity, that you kind of earned your identity by what you did. And so the Lord had to really kind of unravel that for me as well.
So maybe we're going to take a break between each. We're going to cut everything up a little bit. But while we're going to take a short break and give you a couple minutes, and we thought we'd do something where you can draw a picture that represents you. Right? Just real quick. It doesn't have to be a work of art, right? But it has to represent you somehow, tell something about who you are. And then we want you to take a minute, just like 30 seconds or a minute, just quiet before God and ask God to speak to you.
What do you want God to say to you?
Yeah, very, very specifically. When we look back at our past now, a few years on, we can look back and see that there's points in our story that almost were like a shadow. It impacted us so much, like my fear, like my loneliness. It impacted me in a way that changed a little bit how I felt about myself. And we could ask God, we could spend a minute and ask God, say, hey, are there things, maybe God can remind us of some things, maybe you've even forgotten about them, or maybe they don't seem like such a big deal, but they might be casting a bit of a shadow or changing your path a little bit on who you are. Maybe God can point those stories out to you.
So ask God to remind you of anything that's been said to you, about you, experiences that you've had that might be kind of influencing how you think your identity is. And what we mean by identity is what you feel about yourself, how you would kind of recognize yourself. And so if people have been negative, then maybe you've begun to take that on yourself. Or if you were like me and family or something is like, you have to be this way, and you've taken that on. And so let's just take a moment. So draw a picture of yourself, and then on the back, just write down, just take a moment with God and just say, could you remind me of things that have been said or happened to me that might have kind of influenced my identity. And hopefully you remembered some things, but listen, don't worry if even that was difficult for you. We want to kind of talk you through listening to God and hearing his voice, because that's going to be so significant for you as well as you go on this journey, just knowing how to hear God's voice for you.
Yeah, and that's what we see with this guy Moses that we're going to talk about for a few minutes as well, is that some of the things that were in his heart, his fears, his questions, his insecurities, he asked God about them. And that was very different from me as a teenager. I dealt with them in myself, or I dealt with those questions based on the people around me instead of going to God and getting his input on them. And what we've seen over the years is if you ask God a question, he loves talking to you. And you might not hear him right away. You may hear him right away.
You might hear him in a way that you weren't expecting through someone else or through scripture, but you may hear him just speak right to your heart.
Yeah. And what I love about God is that he wants you to come with him. So he'll keep talking to you. You ask him a question, you might not think he's answered right away, but he goes on a conversation on a journey with you, and he doesn't forget those questions, and he'll unpack them for you. But if we look at this guy, Moses. You guys know the story, right? He was in Egypt. He had two moms. Speaking of stories from your past, he had one mom that put him in a basket in a river. He had an Egyptian mom that saved him out of the river. Then he was brought up in his palace. Must have been quite a nice life, but after about 40 years of that, he starts wanting to know really who he is, and he goes on a journey to find out his identity, and ends up going back to his people. And I think he thought he was going to be able to save his people. Ends up killing a soldier though, and then interesting, one of his own people says to him, "Hey, who do you think you are? Like, who do you think you're going to be our savior? You think you're going to be our rescuer? And so he goes on the run. And it's interesting that his own people took a shot at his identity. But you know how it goes. 40 years in the desert, and then he comes across this burning bush, and God's there talking to him and says to him, hey, those people who rejected you, you tried to save, you failed, you know, that whole failure thing, I'm sending you back again.
And what God said to him was so cool, because he was probably freaked out, obviously, like we all would be. But what God said to him was, I will be with you. I will be with you. I am with you. And then God talked to him saying, I want you to come on a journey with me. And though that statement for all of us, and especially for you guys as you go and move into a new season of your life, hearing that from him, I will be with you and I am with you. And on the journey then, God continued. It wasn't just like he was like, go back there. God continued to speak to him, and he said, I know you by name and you have found favor with me. And Moses was a friend of God. And God wants that kind of intimacy with each of us, that we would be his friend, that we would know his voice, that when we're feeling alone, when we're feeling out of our depth, when we're feeling, you know, just like, oh my goodness, where am I? That we go to him and we share with him and we listen, because he is with us.
Yeah, interesting. Moses' first response to God saying for him to do something was like, who am I? Who am I to do something like that? And like Deb said, God was like, hey, I am with you. Look to me. Don't be looking at yourself, but I'm with you, and come on a journey with me.
So what we often do, just like Moses, is when God sends us somewhere or he gives us something that we need to do, we look at ourselves and we say, I'm not good enough, I don't know enough, I haven't been here long enough, all of those things that we might think. And what God wants us to do is reshift onto him and say, but you're good enough, you're with me, you're faithful, you will speak, you will take care of me. And so we'll just take another little minute, and you can write again on the drawing that you have of yourself, and just ask the Lord, are there areas in my life right now where instead of focusing on you, instead of focusing on God, I'm thinking about my own inadequacies, like areas that I'm not good enough, or you know, thinking of like, I don't know the language, and I don't know the people, and I don't know the school system, and I have no friends in this new place. And maybe the Lord just wants to turn us to like, hey, look at me. Look what I can do. Look what I'm saying. So just ask him. When we're saying ask him, we just mean just sit quietly for a moment, hold your pencil, and just ask him that question. Are there areas in my life where I'm focusing on myself and you want me to focus on your bigness and your goodness and your faithfulness? And just whatever pops into your mind, just write it down.
So Moses goes on this journey with God. He's on a journey into his identity. First question was, who am I? And God was like, hey, I'm with you. Come on a journey with me. Question number 2 is like, hey, who do I say you are? Like when they ask me who you are, like who are you? Was question number 2. Great question, by the way. Maybe the most important question that you can ask is to ask God to tell you about himself. But Moses says, who are you? And God gives him this really complicated answer. No one really quite understands it, where God says, I am who I am. But then God goes on and says, hey, if that's a little complicated, tell the people that I'm the God of their fathers. I'm the God that they've heard of, right? And then he says, come on a journey with me. It's going to be amazing. And you're going to see me work, and you're going to go save these people. And he calls them again to go on a journey. And on that journey, not long into that journey, you see God revealing himself and telling Moses more and more, answering his question about who he is.
Once we know who the Father is, we can really receive who we are. And what I want to say to you guys as you go, and even, you know, if you end up staying longer in this whole Corona season, who knows when you'll leave, but that the Lord wants you to know your identity. And your identity and my identity, all of our identities, is that we are sons and daughters of God. Now, you might think I'm being very basic with that, and that maybe is something your parents have told you all the time, but I want to read you a verse. It's 1 John 3:1, and it talks about the love that the Father has for us, and it says, "See the great love that I have lavished on you, that you should be called sons and daughters." You are sons and daughters. So something that I like to say when I think about this is that when you are in your own house, wherever that is at the moment, even if it's transient, you have special privileges in your own house. You know, you can go to the fridge, you can go into your parents' bedroom, you might be starting to steal your parents' clothes, all that kind of stuff. And there's privileges about being the son and the daughter in the house compared to someone who just visits, who just kind of gets to be in maybe 1 or 2 rooms. And we have those privileges with the Father. He has opened heaven up for us to receive all of his goodness from heaven. And so we can avail of those things. We can avail of peace, of joy, of life to the fullest, of healing, of hearing God's voice like we're talking about. God does not hide himself from us. He doesn't hide himself from his children. And you are his child. You are his son or his daughter. And he wants you to avail of those privileges, to hear his voice, to receive his peace, to receive security, all of those things. You don't have to earn them. They are just for you.
So Moses asked God this question, well, who do I say that you are? And God says, hey, I'm the God that you've heard of. I'm the God of your fathers, and come on this journey with me. And it's wonderful because a few months later, Moses and God, and they've seen the Israelites saved from Egypt, and they're back at that same point. And God says to the people, I am your God. And I think that's beautiful. At first it was, hey, I'm the God you've heard of. I'm the God of your fathers. I'm the God of your parents. And they go on a journey with them, and God says, hey, I am your God. And he says, you are my treasured possession, and I'm your God. And so I think it's a great thing. Ask God, who are you? Show yourself to me. And it might be something that, even for you, it's the same thing. Hey, this God I know he's real, but he's the God of my parents. And you go on a journey with God, and he becomes your God. And you know in here, not just words, you know in here that you're his son, his daughter, and you're a treasured possession of God.
So just take a moment again on your paper and just ask God, is there a first step in my journey? And it might be a next step, but what is the step today that you want me to take so that I am living and receiving my identity as a son or a daughter? Is there something that I need to understand in my heart? Something I need to change in my life? What is it, God, that you want me to know about being a son or a daughter?
I don't know what it's like for you now at your age growing up, but when I was your age, we didn't have a TV. And I just spent 5 years on a ship going around.
I just say, it's not that he's that old that there was no TV.
No.
There was TVs. I had a TV.
Yes.
It's not that he's that old. It's that his parents didn't have a TV.
Didn't want a TV. Didn't want a TV in the house. And so this just played on my fears though, because I already felt that I hadn't grown up around these people. I always felt like there was I might not get everything that's going on. My worst fear was being the butt of a joke that I didn't even get, like I didn't understand. And then I didn't have a TV, and so I didn't know the stuff that was just going on that everybody else knew. If they talked about shows on TV, I had no idea about it. I was always trying to be a part, but feeling like I was just a total sham. And people were gonna work out that I didn't know. So,
go ahead, you explain.
So now we're going to do an interaction that just harps back, plays on my fears as a teenager with no TV.
Okay, so you guys are going to say maybe to yourselves, or if you can hear each other, you can say it to each other, you can write it down, who these people are, okay?
I would not have known these people.
And here's the deal. Who cares who knows
cares?
them or who doesn't?
Who cares?
These people are not the people that are important in our lives, but it does make the point just about like we can be in those situations and we're like, oh, I don't want to be the odd one out. Okay, so
do they the first one to name the person?
no, they're just gonna write it down.
Okay. Yes.
Number one.
Number one. And two.
Number two.
Again, if you don't know these people, we don't care.
Who cares?
We're just having fun.
Number three. One of our daughters is kind of in love with this guy. Here's for the sporty guys and girls.
Okay. Two more.
This guy.
May become the next president of America. Come on.
And this guy. Okay.
How many was that? 5, 6 celebrities.
So here's the deal. We don't care if you know them or not.
But
it's fun. But it is true. You know, we can be in those situations where we're like, oh my goodness, I don't know. And then we start performing. And we really don't want to do that. Because that, for all of us, whether you're a missionary kid or not a missionary kid, we do not want to be performers and just coming outside of our identity, because the Lord has given you an incredible identity that He created you to be, and He doesn't want you to start drifting outside of that to perform for other people.
Question number one, Moses says, who am I? Question number two, he says, God, who are you? Who do I say you are? And then question number three is interesting, just along these lines of other people. He gets quite vulnerable. Again, Moses says, hey, what if I do what you tell me to do and people don't believe me? And I think what he was also kind of saying was, hey, what if people laugh at me? Like, what if this just doesn't work out? And it's an interesting question, because when we look at these, knowing who these people are, or the people that are around us, or like me as a kid, just so consumed with the people around me, I think that was part of Moses' question. Was like, hey, what if this doesn't work out? What they rejected me before and said, who do you think you are? And what if they do that again and reject me again? And I think that's awesome, because Moses was vulnerable about how he really feels, and he went to God with that. And I think my mistake as a teenager was that's how I felt on the inside, was I didn't want to be rejected. But where I went to with that fear was the people around me, and how I felt on the inside was based on something as up and down as the people around me. Whereas Moses, just straight, question number three, he goes to God and says, hey, what if I get rejected again? And what I love about God's response is that this time he didn't say, when Moses was that vulnerable, this time he didn't say, hey, come on a journey. This time he actually said, hey, let me help you with that, right? When you're in those situations where you're fearful like that, you do this. And he gave Moses, that's when he gave Moses the staff. And he was like, hey, that staff, that'll turn into a snake, and people will know that you were with me. Or here, if you take some water and throw it on the ground, it'll become blood, and people will know that I'm with you.
So are there areas in our lives, all of us, where we're looking to others instead of looking at firstly what the Father thinks of us, and where He's basically just saying, hey, don't look at other people. Don't look at what people think of you, at how you're performing. Look at me. Because you're going to look at me, you're going to know who I am, and you're going to know who you are. So just take a moment again and just ask the Lord, are there areas where I'm looking more to other people's opinions and how I come across to everyone than how you see me? Because how He sees you is so good. Even when you don't see yourself as being good, He sees you in your true identity, and He's calling you into that. Moses was very real, which I like. We get to see his conversations with God, which is so good because it kind of gives us freedom as well to have those kind of conversations with God. But one of Moses's big fears was that he stuttered and he had a speech impediment, and that's so scary. Like, you're asked to go, speak to a whole nation of people, and you're like, I can't even get the words out. But God was so tender and kind with him.
So question number 1, he says, who do I say I am? Question number 2, he asks God, most important question of all time, who are you? And then question number 3, he's like, hey, what if they laugh at me? What if they reject me? And then question number 4, more of a response, was almost like to God, hey, do you really know? I mean, I'm slow to speak. I'm not quick off the mark, and I stutter, and you really want to send me? And again, super vulnerable to Moses, and then super kind and tender of God. And God said to him, I am your helper and I'm your teacher. And again, it's almost like this thing, hey, come with me and I'll teach you. Come with me and I'll help you. And so it requires a courage that Moses actually goes on to show. Moses takes that first step, and God shows him and teaches him.
So something just for us to finish up this little section would be for us to ask God another question. We love asking God questions. Ask God the question in a moment, what is my biggest fear? And we all have fears. So what is my biggest fear? Maybe in regards to where you're going or the life changes that are happening with your family. So what's my biggest fear? So write that down after he speaks it to you, and then say to him, what do you say about it? Because Moses told him, but I stutter, and then God told him what he felt about that and what he was going to do. So we want to do the same thing. So this is my big fear, God. What do you want to say about it? And God will give you a truth. And before we go,
I think just to answer your question from the first video, how did I come from being someone who was lonely and petrified and dependent on how people were treating me, dictated how I felt? I think it all comes down to what Debs is saying, is knowing what God says about me and going on that journey with him, where you take steps and you ask him, hey, what is your response to this? And then we know that we have a God. How amazing is that the God of this universe would say to someone, hey, I am your helper. And that's what God's saying to you today. I'm never going to leave you. I'm never going to forsake you. Come on a journey with me, and I'm going to unravel all this. We're going to unpack this together on a journey where you get to see me and you get to know yourself for who you really are.
When you are going on into this new season, your Father wants you to know that he has given you an identity already. It's not dependent on the country you live in. It's not dependent on the school you go to. He gave you that identity, and he wants you to live in it in freedom.